And welcome to the Long Island Museum. My name is Jonathan Olly. I'm one of the two curators here at the museum. And today we're going to be doing a gallery tour of the exhibition A Century After, the work of William M. Davis. This is an exhibition that opened earlier this year. Unfortunately, we're currently closed at the moment. So we're going to give you this virtual walkthrough with myself over about the next 15 or 20 minutes. And so first, just a little background about William Davis. He was born in Setauket in 1829, and at the age of 16, he decided to drop out of school or leave school and become a cabin boy, sailing on various vessels on Long Island Sound. And then at the age of 18, he decided to come ashore and become an apprentice at a shipyard in Port Jefferson to learn how to be a boat builder. Then at the age of 19, he got married to a woman named Caroline Peterson, and they eventually had 4 children over the next 19 years. But this is only where our story begins, because when he was working at the boatyard, he already displayed an interest in art. He sketched various people that he worked with, and apparently by the 1850s he decided to become a painter. And so if we come over here, this is the start of our artistic journey. This is a self-portrait that Davis did in 1860, and it already shows his skill as a painter. And at the start of this decade, living nearby was one of the most famous painters in America, an artist named William Sidney Mount. And Davis and Mount became friends. They corresponded back and forth. And right here in this case, we have examples of their correspondence. There's some surviving letters. This is most of them between about 1861 and about 1867, although they certainly knew each other before that. And they remained friends up until Mount's death in 1868. And one powerful example of their friendship is this painting right here. And so this is a painting by William Sidney Mount that he did in 1861 of Davis's daughter Lucy, and it's called Little Ludy, which is a nickname for Lucy. And he painted this from memory because Lucy had died several years before. And so he had given this to Davis and his wife as a gift. And so it remains in the family collection, and it's a powerful example of not only Mount's talent as an artist, but of their connection as friends. And so in the 1860s, Davis, like a lot of artists in the area, moved to New York City to establish his reputation, and he became famous in the early 1860s for 3 anti-Confederate portraits. And this is the sole surviving example. It's called The Neglected Picture, and the person being depicted is the President of the Confederacy, Jefferson Davis, who is not related to William Davis. And this was during the American Civil War, and Jefferson Davis was a much hated figure. And so William Davis made this type of painting which is called trompe l'oeil, which is an oil painting, but is meant to look like something else. And so it's painted to look like an engraving of Jefferson Davis in a smashed and broken frame. And so you can see the broken glass, you can see the fly specks, you can see a fly there, and you can see tucked into the depiction of this print is the business cards of a cordage maker and an undertaker. And so this was Davis's way of saying that he wanted the President of the Confederacy dead. So cordage for hanging him, and the undertaker for burying him. And so this drew a lot of notoriety in the New York City art scene in the 1860s, and it really established Davis as a painter to follow. Somebody who was obviously very highly skilled and also willing to take risks in making controversial art at the time. But Davis only stayed in New York City for about 12 years. By the early 1870s, his health was declining, and so he made the decision to move from New York City back to the Port Jefferson area where he was from, and he settled in Mount Sinai, and there he lived with his wife and children and ran an art supply store on East Main Street in Port Jefferson, and above that he had an artist studio. And this arrangement of having a business as well as continuing to paint gave Davis the freedom to paint what he wanted, which were primarily landscapes, still lifes, and genre paintings. And so now we're going to look at an example of his landscape painting. What we have right here are two examples of a cider press that used to stand in Setauket, which is the next village over, from the early 19th century through probably the early 20th century. William City Mount had actually painted this back in the late 1830s. And so it drew Davis's attention first in 1860. So again, this is right at the start of his career as an artist. And then Davis revisited it again in 1875. And so this actually tells the story of what is happening. So area farmers would bring their apple crop each fall to the cider press, and the apples will be dumped into this track, and then a horse pulls this wheel around the track and it crushes the apples. And so you can see a pile of apples here and a shovel to put them into there. And then the crushed up apples are then again shoveled into this press, and then these are squeezed down, and then the juice comes out. And then this man here is taking the juice, ladling it into a barrel. They filter it using straw. And then the apple juice will be allowed to ferment into hard cider, which is what we still drink that today. And that would be something that farmers could then sell at market or drink themselves throughout the year because it preserved well. And then we come over here. Davis also painted friends and neighbors. And so here we have an example. This is called Sharpening the Saw from 1867. And it shows an African-American farmer using a file to sharpen the teeth on a buck saw before he resumes cutting firewood. And so this was painted 2 years after the end of the American Civil War, but more importantly, this was painted 40 years after the end of slavery in New York State. And given the gray hair that you can see on this man, he probably was born on Long Island, right here on the North Shore, when slavery was still ongoing in New York State. And so it's a poignant portrait of both endurance, survival, and a reference to American and Long Island slavery. And coming over here, we have examples of Davis's nature studies and still lifes. And he could create wholly imaginary scenes, one of which we'll see in a moment, but he could also create very careful studies of nature. So right here, because of his focus, we know that this is called a Fowler's toad, and this is an eastern box turtle. And you can see that the turtle has a red eye, and male box turtles have red eyes. And the title Friend or Foe, obviously these two animals are sizing each other up, and it is indeed true that turtles eat toads, and so the toad certainly has a right to be wary. So now I'd like to draw your attention over to this far wall. And as I mentioned earlier, sailing, maritime life, the shipbuilding industry was an important part of Davis's life since he was a child. And so this is a scene that would have been very familiar to not only him, but a lot of other people who lived in and around Long Island. This is a depiction of a busy day on Long Island Sound. Here you have a schooner, probably coming from Connecticut, which would be in the background, and it's passing a lightship. And essentially, this is a ship that's meant to be a floating lighthouse. And these sort of circles or balls at the top of the mast are called day markers, and they're meant to, and also the ship is painted red. And both of those are meant to illustrate the fact that this ship is anchored near a hazard, such as rocks or shallow water, and it's meant to be a navigation aid for vessels that are going back and forth and down Long Island Sound. And if you just look right here in the corner of the canvas, I don't know how well it shows up, but that is a very early steamship. And so you can see the side paddle wheel right there, and you can see the funnel. And so that's evident of the fact that in the 19th century, steamships gradually supplanted sailing vessels for carrying people and cargo in nearby waters. And Davis did not usually paint portraits. However, this is a rare surviving example. The man being depicted is, his name was Tamarack Flint, which is a nickname, and he's depicted trout fishing. And you can see there's a bottle of water there, there's a bindle. And Tamarack Flint, his name was William Flint, and he was actually a shipwreck survivor. The ship Tamarack wrecked on Fire Island in 1839, and he was a survivor, he was an Englishman, but instead of returning to Europe, he decided to stay on Long Island and eventually worked as a traveling preacher. And he died in Setauket in the 1860s, which is probably how he crossed paths with Davis. And Davis obviously found him sort of a colorful, contemporary, interesting character, and decided to depict him probably fishing for lunch. But Davis sometimes recorded events that he himself did not see. So this is depicting a race of the New York Yacht Club on June 15th, 1877, during their annual regatta between two yachts, the Rambler and the Wanderer. And both vessels were racing off the coast of New Jersey, or actually off the coast of Staten Island, sorry, when they were caught in a squall. And so you can see both vessels, you can see the storm in the background, and the sails are being caught up in the wind. This was not something that Davis likely traveled to New Jersey or Staten Island or the south coast of Long Island to witness himself, but it would have been reported a lot in local papers because he was one of many artists who decided to depict versions of this dramatic scene. And this painting would have actually been produced in a setting that looks very much like this, because this is a chair that belonged to Jefferson Davis, this is a table that he used, and this is an easel that was not Davis's. This is actually William Sidney Mount's easel, but Davis owned an almost identical example. They may have actually been made by the same craftsman. But so Davis would have sat here and worked on actually a lot of these paintings in a setup very similar to this, with the canvas balanced on these two pegs. And right here we have a surviving example of a paint box that Davis used, and maybe a little bit hard to see, but there are some paintbrushes in there, as well as tubes of oil paint. And both the paint box, the chair, and the table are part of the collection of the Jefferson Historical Society, which also has examples of Davis's paintings. So if you have a chance to go and see them, I highly recommend it. Right here is what has become Davis's most famous painting since his death in 1920. It's called A Canvas Back. He painted it in the 1870s, and similar to his earlier painting of Jefferson Davis, this is also a trompe-l'oeil, or fool the eye in French, and it's meant to depict the backside of a painting, where you can see that Davis has tucked in a number of letters sent to him, and this one includes some money. And then over here is a very unusual example of his work. This is an allegorical painting. It's called Love's Entreaty, and we're not sure where it dates to, but late 19th century. And in Western art, the boat can symbolize the journey of life. And so here we have a young woman. She's on a boat stocked with music and food and flowers. And you have here on the shore Cupid asking to be taken on. And so this is the moment in this woman's life where she's either going to let love into her life or not. And late in Davis's life, around the time that he painted this painting, his first wife passed away. But Davis, even though he was in his 60s, decided to get remarried. And with his second wife, they remained together for the next 25 years until his death at the age of 90. And also referencing the boat, on one level, this is a landscape painting of Port Jefferson Harbor, and it's called the Lone Fisherman. And you can see how Davis's signature, W.M. Davis, in the lower right. And Davis has made himself part of this painting. And so if you take a look at the man in the boat, This is actually Davis. He has a long white beard, he's got a pipe in his mouth, and he's holding a fishing pole. And even though he's fishing as the lone fisherman, he himself is not alone, because at this point he had 4 children, he had a number of grandchildren, and he had a second wife. And I'd like to end with this painting right here. This is called Lecture Night at the Baptist Church, Port Jefferson. He painted this around 1910. This church is still around. It's on East Main Street in Port Jefferson. And this is an unusual painting for Davis because it actually shows modern technology sort of showing up in what normally would be these sort of pastoral, very classic looks at Long Island landscape. Here we have an early automobile. Here we have a telephone pole carrying telephone lines and electric wires. And also we have electricity. And so this is showing changes that are beginning to transform Long Island in the early 20th century. And so it's a great snapshot of the changes that were happening just in the neighborhood where he was painting. And so Davis painted from the 1860s all the way into the 19-teens, and he passed away in 1920 at the age of 90. And he left behind probably, I would guess, several hundred canvases. We have about 36 of his works here at the museum, and many more remain in private collections and in other museums in the Long Island area and around the country. And so if you ever have a chance to see the work of William M. Davis in person, I highly recommend it. And this exhibition will be open through the end of 2020. And so we look forward to having you at the museum and being able to see these works in person when we reopen. So I thank you for joining us on this brief preview of A Century After, the work of William